The pattern Cayce identified in his readings during the 1930s and 40s is manifesting right now in ways that should awaken us, not terrify us. In his prophetic readings, he stated that reincarnation would shift from fringe belief to mainstream acceptance, and when it did, it would fundamentally restructure how humanity understands justice, responsibility, and the meaning of existence itself. What we're witnessing today isn't coincidence. It's the exact threshold moment he described. Recent surveys show a dramatic spike in reincarnation acceptance across Western populations, particularly among younger generations who seem to carry an innate knowing of multiple lifetimes. Simultaneously, scientific research into consciousness, near-death experiences, and past life memories has reached a critical mass that mainstream institutions can no longer dismiss. This isn't just a spiritual trend. It's a civilization beginning to remember what it deliberately forgot, and the implications will reshape law, ethics, religion, psychology, and our understanding of human purpose. Are you recognizing this pattern unfolding? Share your observations in the comments below. During his trance state spanning nearly 4 decades, Edgar Cayce made a prediction that seemed impossible to those who first heard it. Reincarnation would transition from rejected doctrine to accepted reality in Western civilization. And when this shift occurred, it would shake the foundations of every institution humanity had built. He wasn't speaking metaphorically. Cayce understood that accepting reincarnation doesn't just add a belief to your spiritual toolkit, it fundamentally alters how you perceive justice, responsibility, relationships, suffering, inequality, and the entire purpose of human existence. We're now standing at the threshold of this transformation, and most people haven't fully grasped what's about to change when collective consciousness crosses this particular line. Cayce's readings on reincarnation weren't presented as religious dogma or Eastern philosophy imported to the West. They emerged organically through thousands of life readings where he accessed what he called the Akashic records, the cosmic memory of every soul's journey through time. In reading after reading throughout the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, patterns became undeniable. The same souls appeared in multiple eras, working through specific lessons, carrying forward talents and traumas, meeting the same soul groups again and again. But Cayce went further than simply confirming reincarnation's reality. He explained that Western civilization's deliberate rejection of this truth, orchestrated primarily through certain interpretations of Christianity, had created massive distortions in how humanity understood cause and effect, how societies structured justice systems, and how individuals approached their brief time in physical form. The prophetic element wasn't just that people would eventually accept reincarnation. Cayce specifically stated that this acceptance would emerge during a particular phase of human evolution, a time when the collective consciousness of humanity had reached sufficient maturity to handle the profound implications. He indicated this shift would coincide with other signs: increased psychic sensitivity in the general population, children born with clearer memories of past lives, scientific discoveries that couldn't be explained through materialist frameworks, and a widespread sense that something fundamental about human existence had been misunderstood. Every single one of these indicators is manifesting right now. Recent polling data reveals something extraordinary happening beneath the surface of Western culture. Surveys conducted over the past 5 years show reincarnation acceptance has jumped dramatically, particularly among adults under 40. What was once confined to niche spiritual communities has quietly become a majority or near-majority belief in multiple demographic groups, but the data only captures conscious belief. What's harder to measure but equally significant is the growing number of people who, even without formal belief in reincarnation, speak naturally about old souls, feel inexplicable connections to certain historical periods, recognize people they've known before, or experience the sense that this lifetime is one chapter in a much longer story. The membrane between unconscious knowing and conscious acceptance is becoming increasingly thin. The scientific establishment, long hostile to anything suggesting consciousness survives death, is experiencing its own uncomfortable reckoning. Research into near-death experiences has accumulated cases that strain materialist explanations to the breaking point. Patients describing accurate details of events occurring while they were clinically dead, children recounting verifiable information about deceased individuals they couldn't possibly have known through normal means, therapeutic techniques that access apparent past life memories producing measurable psychological healing. University departments that once wouldn't touch this research are now quietly investigating. The data isn't conclusive in the way materialist science demands, but it's substantial enough that dismissal requires willful blindness. Something is compelling mainstream institutions to look at what they've long refused to see. This isn't random cultural drift. It's a pattern Cayce specifically identified, one that's played out before in human history. During his readings on ancient civilizations, particularly Atlantis and Egypt, he described periods when humanity possessed direct knowing of reincarnation, and how that knowing shaped radically different social structures. Those civilizations understood that the beggar you ignore today might be working through karmic consequences you helped create in a previous era. They recognized that talents weren't random gifts, but earned capacities carried forward. They built educational and spiritual systems around the reality of the soul's long journey. Then came periods of forgetting, deliberate suppressions of this knowledge by power structures that benefited from populations believing they had only one chance, one life, one opportunity to get it right or face eternal consequences. Cayce indicated we're now in a remembering phase, and like all such transitions, it arrives with disruption. The historical parallel is significant because it reveals why this shift matters so profoundly. When civilizations have forgotten reincarnation, they inevitably develop what Cayce called distorted frameworks of justice and meaning. Legal systems built on the assumption that this single lifetime is all that exists produce specific types of punishment and reward that make no sense in a multi-life context. Religions that threaten eternal damnation for finite mistakes create populations living in fear and spiritual confusion. Economic systems that maximize short-term gain at the expense of long-term consequences operate from a paradigm that ignores karmic mathematics. Educational approaches that treat every child as a blank slate fail to recognize earned wisdom and carried trauma. The entire architecture of Western civilization has been constructed on a foundation that denies what Cayce said is the fundamental reality of human existence. Now imagine what shifts when that foundation cracks. When reincarnation moves from fringe belief to accepted framework, everything built on the old assumptions begins to destabilize. This is what Cayce meant when he said it would shake the world. Not through cataclysm, but through the quiet, relentless logic of changed understanding rippling through every system humans have created. You cannot maintain certain legal structures when you accept that the criminal and victim might be working through multi-lifetime karma. You cannot sustain certain religious doctrines when you acknowledge that souls have multiple opportunities to evolve. You cannot justify certain economic exploitations when you recognize that consequences extend beyond a single generation. The entire framework of how Western civilization has organized itself for centuries begins to look increasingly incoherent. Cayce was clear that this wouldn't happen overnight and wouldn't happen uniformly. He described it as a gradual awakening that would accelerate at certain threshold points. We appear to be approaching one of those acceleration moments. The signs are everywhere for those observing consciously. Notice how conversations that would have seemed bizarre 20 years ago now happen casually in mainstream spaces. People discussing past lives, soul contracts, karmic relationships without the defensive caveats that used to accompany such topics. Notice how younger generations especially seem to carry an innate comfort with reincarnation concepts, as if they arrived already knowing something previous generations had to painstakingly rediscover. Notice how therapeutic and healing modalities that work with past life material have quietly moved from fringe practice to accepted technique in certain professional circles. But here's where Cayce's prophecy becomes both challenging and empowering. He indicated that reincarnation's acceptance wouldn't automatically elevate humanity. The knowledge itself is neutral. What matters is how consciousness applies it. Civilizations that understood reincarnation have still fallen into materialism, cruelty, and spiritual bankruptcy when they use that knowledge to justify hierarchy, excuse inaction, or avoid present responsibility. The Atlantean civilization Cayce described had full awareness of reincarnation, yet still destroyed itself through the misuse of power and technology. Knowing you have multiple lives can lead to complacency. I'll work on that in the next incarnation, just as easily as it can inspire urgency about spiritual development. The acceptance of reincarnation, Cayce warned, must be paired with conscious understanding of why we reincarnate: to learn, to serve, to evolve, to eventually reunite with the divine source from which we emerged. This is where individual choice becomes critical in the midst of collective shift. Cayce's readings emphasized that each soul's response to emerging truth determines their trajectory through the transition. Some will accept reincarnation, and use it as justification for continued selfishness. Karma will balance eventually, so my choices don't matter now. Others will recognize it as the profound responsibility it actually represents. Every action creates consequences that follow you. Every relationship carries forward. Every moment of consciousness is building the conditions you'll inhabit next time. The difference between these responses isn't intellectual, it's spiritual. It requires honest self-examination about whether you're seeking truth to grow or seeking concepts to excuse stagnation. The practical implications for how you live right now are immense. If reincarnation is real and humanity is collectively remembering this truth, then several things become immediately relevant to your daily choices. First, the people around you aren't random. They're souls you've likely known before, working through specific dynamics that didn't resolve in previous meetings. Your difficult relationships aren't punishments but opportunities to finally heal patterns that have persisted across lifetimes. Second, your talents and interests aren't accidents. They're capacities you've developed over multiple incarnations, and this life is your chance to refine and share them. Whatever you're naturally drawn to likely represents work you've been doing for a very long time. Third, your challenges aren't arbitrary. They're precisely calibrated learning opportunities designed by your own soul to address specific areas of needed growth. The circumstances that feel most difficult are often the exact lessons you chose to work on this time around. Cayce's readings on reincarnation also addressed what happens to those who resist the emerging truth. He indicated that as collective consciousness shifts, individuals face a choice point: evolve with the collective movement or become increasingly uncomfortable in a world that no longer reflects their rigid frameworks. This isn't punishment, it's natural consequence. If the civilization around you is beginning to operate from multi-life awareness while you insist on single-life thinking, you'll experience growing dissonance between your internal reality and external environment. Cayce suggested this is already creating much of the anxiety and existential confusion we see escalating in populations clinging to outdated paradigms. The solution isn't forced belief, but honest inquiry. What if the framework you've insisted upon is actually limiting your understanding of the very thing you're trying to comprehend? There's also a collective dimension that Cayce emphasized. As more individuals accept reincarnation, it creates what he called a morphic resonance, a field of shared understanding that makes it easier for others to access the same truth. This is why the shift accelerates once it reaches critical mass. Each person who consciously integrates reincarnation understanding strengthens the collective field, making it more accessible to those still approaching the threshold. Your individual awakening to this reality isn't just personal, it contributes to the global tipping point Cayce described. This is why he emphasized that those who recognize the truth early have a responsibility to embody it with integrity, because others will be watching, consciously or unconsciously, to see whether this framework produces wisdom, compassion, and spiritual maturity, or just becomes another belief system people use to feel superior. The ultimate question Cayce posed through his readings on reincarnation wasn't whether you believe in multiple lives. It was whether you're willing to live with the level of responsibility that reincarnation actually demands. If your actions create consequences that follow you beyond death, then casual cruelty becomes impossible to justify. If your spiritual development is cumulative across lifetimes, then this incarnation's choices have exponential significance. If the people you harm or help are souls you'll meet again, then every interaction carries weight beyond what you can see in the moment. Cayce's prophecy about reincarnation shaking the world isn't about buildings falling, it's about the sudden, unavoidable recognition of just how much your choices have always mattered, how connected you've always been, and how long the journey you're actually on extends beyond this brief physical chapter. If you're recognizing these patterns manifesting around you, if you're feeling the collective consciousness shifting toward multi-life awareness, if this resonates as truth rather than theory, I encourage you to like this video and subscribe to this channel. We're documenting the signs Cayce identified and helping those who are aware navigate this transition consciously. Drop a comment sharing whether you've noticed this shift in your own awareness or in conversations around you. Your observations contribute to the collective recognition that something fundamental is changing. But beyond engagement with content, the real question is personal and immediate. When reincarnation shifts from concept to lived reality in your consciousness, how does that change what you do tomorrow? How does it alter how you treat the difficult person at work, knowing you might be resolving a pattern that's persisted for centuries? How does it shift your approach to your talents, recognizing them as hard-won capacities you've been developing across multiple incarnations. How does it reframe your challenges, understanding them as precisely chosen opportunities for growth you knew you needed? Cayce didn't share this prophecy to give you interesting information. He shared it to call you to a different level of conscious participation in your own evolution and in humanity's collective journey. The acceptance is spreading. The institutions are beginning to shake. The only remaining question is whether you'll meet this moment with the spiritual seriousness it deserves, or whether you'll watch it unfold from the sidelines, still pretending that this lifetime is isolated from the eternal progression of your soul. The world Cayce saw coming is beginning to manifest. You're here, aware, at the exact moment when civilization starts remembering what it forgot. That's not coincidence. That's the pattern of souls who chose to incarnate specifically for times of great transition, carrying the capacity to help others navigate what's emerging. The prophecy was never just about belief changing. It was about consciousness evolving, systems transforming, and individuals finally accepting the staggering responsibility and extraordinary opportunity of being an eternal being, having a temporary human experience. This is that moment. This is that threshold. Your response to it matters more than you can possibly measure from your current vantage point. Choose consciously. Choose with awareness that you're not just living through interesting times. You're participating in one of the pivotal shifts Cayce identified as essential for humanity's next phase of evolution. The reincarnation awakening is here. The only question is whether you're spiritually prepared for what it demands and what it makes possible.